And so the guy does believe though. And so that's good. I mean, that's a good thing. So this official believes because, and that's why he asks, because why does he ask what hour?
So he would know that that's when Jesus said it.
What would be the other explanation?
Better some other way.
The placebo effect.
Yeah.
He just happened to get better at that.
Placebo.
Placebo. Yeah, that's when they do a experiment on a drug and they give one person the drug and another person a pill that's got nothing in it. And you both take the pill because some people will get better just because they took the pill. They call that the placebo effect. So, in other words, did his son just get better on his own, or was it really Jesus that healed him? When he tells him what time, he knows it's exactly when Jesus said. So he himself believed, and all his household. The effect is kind of like the Samaritans. Everybody who saw what happened, everybody who was aware of the details, they then believe also. And this was now the second sign that Jesus did when he'd come from Judea to Galilee. So he's only done 2 signs, but he's already challenges them to say, this, y'all won't believe me unless you see a sign. You almost get the idea that when Jesus goes to Galilee, what does he kind of, and you could say it this way, what would he like to happen?
And to listen to his teaching.
Yeah. Did they not be required to see a sign? They would just listen to his teaching. Well, how is Jesus going to convince them that his teaching is true without a sign? What's he going to use for a witness? The miracle was a witness. What's he going to use for a witness?
John the Baptist.
Okay, right. But maybe they weren't around John. So what else is he going to use? Aaron?
Scriptures.
Yeah, the Old Testament scriptures. Which eventually had to be what brought people to faith anyway. You saw that with the Samaritans. We don't believe now, but we believe because we heard his words that he was hoping. It's so startling. He'd been to Galilee all this time, but he'd only done 2 miracles. And he'd done more than that one day down in Judea. He's healing all the sick people and they were bringing them to him. So it's quite a contrast as he's dealing in Jerusalem with the skeptics, and he's in Galilee, but he sees that although in Galilee they seem to be more open, it's the same problem is you won't believe me just because what I teach. You're only believing me because what you see. And he wanted them to have greater faith in that. Why? What's the big deal? As long as they believe, what does it matter? Aaron.
You see, from what Nicodemus says at the beginning of chapter 3, it seems that the Jewish culture is that they are trained in their teaching to seek for signs. That's the only way that I will believe that you are a prophet or that you're from God. Because Nicodemus says that nobody could do this unless they're from God. And he calls Jesus a teacher. Doesn't ascribe him to be the Son of God. But it's that idea that I think the Jewish culture, because Paul even says that in 1 Corinthians, that the Jews seek for a sign. It is like ingrained in their teaching from the law, from all this stuff, that they have to see a sign in order to believe. And I think that's what Jesus, when you compare them to the Samaritans didn't need a sign. They just, the woman, it's the woman's word.
Mm-hmm.
They never saw a miracle. They just believe the woman, and then they go and see Jesus, and then Jesus says to them, teaches them, and they believe him at his word. They don't need to see a sign. I think that's a breath of fresh air for Jesus. That's why he stays there a couple of days. And so, when he gets back to the Jewish culture and he sees this royal official, he gets frustrated. It's like, man, like you guys just believe. And I think that's a big difference there.
Yeah.
So that's why I think that's what Jesus is facing here is that it's so ingrained in the Jewish culture by the Jewish teaching that they won't just believe the scriptures.
Right. And what we see is there's an inherent weakness in that because as we go through John, he's going to make this point over and over that there's a difference because you seek him because he did the sign and you're seeking him for who he is and the sign confirms who he is. There's a difference. And he's going to bring that out later on in John.
Yeah, it appears that the signs are almost transactional.
that they don't create lasting faith.
Yeah.
Maybe if it, like, you get a specific sign for you that does it for you, like for this man, but it doesn't say anybody else believed it, right? That this happened. Even in a couple chapters when he's gonna feed them, they're gonna be back the next day for it again. It's like, well, wasn't that miracle enough? Wasn't that enough for you all to just be completely convinced and you'll follow me wherever because you know who I am? But it doesn't work like that at all. It appears from the signs like they really just have to believe the words.
Yeah. And remind me of this the other night watching, Charlton Heston's The Ten Commandments. It comes on every Easter. And if you haven't ever watched that, man, it's like it's the top of the notch for that show. I mean, it's really cool. It's made in the 50s, that movie was. And so it's, the special effects are kind of hokey. But what it reminds you again over and over is that Moses does all these signs to get them out, all these signs, all these signs, all these signs. And then they get to Sinai finally after, and again, he parts the Red Sea. And they get to Sinai and he's up there for, 40 days and they lose faith. It's incredible how quickly the signs wore off. And I mean, not just a little sign. These were signs over the whole land of Egypt. So I think what it says is that us, that signs are never enough. Signs are very, very good for us to catch our attention, to emotionally connect us with what's happened. But the signs don't have staying power. That's what we're going to see throughout John. And that's what he's going to try to get us to see. So it's no wonder, I think the whole book of John is really the book that people are caught up in the miraculous age being here today. They don't know John because clearly that way of doing it doesn't work. Jesus says that over and over. So you can see why God made it where it would be in the long-term best interest for mankind to have the written word and not have to rely on signs. And yet people today want a sign. If God could just show me something, if God could talk to me, if God could do this, whatever. And I think as we go through John, kind of think about that, how Jesus is really showing us, it goes against our thinking. We think if Jesus showed up tonight in the building, everybody's faith would increase. And the Bible's clear that is not what would happen. That is not what would happen. That this is better than Jesus showing up in the building tonight. And he's going to demonstrate that, over and over. Just
Yeah, well, I mean, John sets that up at the end of chapter 2, where he talks about, he performed all these signs, but he didn't entrust himself to men.
Yep.
So, and even, as he's coming to Galilee, he said, prophet has no honor in his own hometown, like John throws that in. So, I mean, this is what he expected. And I'm sure it disappointed him, but he knew coming in what they were going to be like and what was going to happen. So it's a little bit of, this response he gives makes sense because here it is. Here's what, it's almost like they were on the way and he's like, look, we're going to get to Galilee and they're just going to ask for signs and wonders. And they show up and first thing that happens, he's like, see, right? Like, this is it. This is what happens. This is what it looks like. So.
And it didn't mean, and from the other gospel accounts spend a lot more time with Jesus in Galilee and in that area, a lot more stories. He does do more miracles up there than this. But John, now when we get to chapter 5, John completely switches gears. And the rest of John, I'm telling you, John 5 through 11 is about Jesus dealing with the Jewish leaders and dealing with the Jews in general and their problem of faith. And he's going to focus on that the rest of the time. He's not going to deal with all that went on in Galilee. He's going to focus on Jesus going to Jerusalem. Now, in chapter 5, verse 1, after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. You can read that and think, well, that was like the next day, but it's not. Probably chronologically, this is at least a year later. Some people think a year and a half to 2 years later, from where the end of chapter 4 is to him going here. Because the tone of everything changes when we get to chapter 5, because of what we're going to read in chapter 5. So again, as you think about the book of John, you've got to lock into chapter 5. Because what happens in chapter 5 sets the stage for the rest of the book. And now kind of the honeymoon's over. All right, so Jesus has gone down to Jerusalem again. Now, why does he keep traveling from, whoa,
Maybe Jesus is
As
the
a
sign.
I do have the power. Why is Jesus traveling back and forth between Galilee and Jerusalem all the time? Not all the time, but when he does. Feast. How often is that? At least 3 times a year. So Jesus, as a faithful Jew, is going to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year. They would present themselves 3 times a year in Jerusalem. So he goes. So what we're seeing is he goes up to Galilee for a while, but then he goes back down for the feast. He goes back to Galilee, comes back down for the feast. And then he stays sometimes a little longer than just the feast. But most of what we read about, these confrontations all, are just coming on his trips down to Jerusalem just to go to the feast. The 3 feasts a year. And again, maybe there's some speculation that there were some other feasts that they would travel there for too, but at least the 3 feasts a year. So he goes back to Jerusalem. And verse 2, now there was in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethsaida, which has 5 colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. So what's a sheep gate?
That's where they let the sheep in and out.
Okay, some people think that's probably why they called it the sheep gate. But what's a sheep gate in Jerusalem? What's the idea of a gate? Think about how's Jerusalem laid out?
Go through the wall.
Yeah, so remember Jerusalem has this gigantic wall around it, right? And we know more about that than anywhere else because of Nehemiah. Nehemiah goes back to rebuild the wall. Ezra rebuilds the temple. Nehemiah rebuilds the wall. And in Nehemiah chapter 1, and again, I think in chapter 12, they specifically mention they finished the sheep gate. So remember, Nehemiah's coming after the city's been destroyed by Babylon. So more than likely, and Herod rebuilds a temple, but that wall that they're encountering in Jesus' day is the same wall. I'm sure they had repairs and things over time, but the same wall that Nehemiah had and the people had repaired. And so they think they found that today. You can go look at pictures, but it's interesting. You think about, so in modern Jerusalem, they say overall, and it's different in different areas, but there's about 40 feet on top of what the ground was during the time of Jesus. So whenever they have to excavate to go down to the real sheep gate, they got to go down 40 feet. And that's why it's very confusing when you look at the archaeological evidence of these things, because they got to go down, down, down to see what. So there's walls up that are there now, not the original walls. The original walls are 40 feet down. And so that's why they do these major excavations and they find all kind of things, because it's all under 40 feet of rubble. Because what they would do is every time something would happen, they wouldn't clean it all up like we do and haul it to the dump. They just build right on top of it. So, but they have found some of those original gates, and they think they found the sheep gate. There's some controversy about it, but it gives you the idea. It's just an arched opening. So here's this giant wall around the city, and they got to get in and out of it. So they have these gates, and around these gates, they'd have these towers where they could obviously protect the gates when people would try to come in. But there's gates all around the city. And so by this particular gate are these pools. And this is an interesting thing, again, because they think they found the pools around there. There's some controversy about that many years ago. There never would have been pools there. But they found at least some of the pools, and they've identified them, and they think that's why they know this is the particular sheep gate. But it's just kind of interesting. But around that, there are 5 roof colonnades, these structures around there with pools under them. And in these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. And one had been their invalid for 38 years. Now, remember, it's not saying like the blind man later on is going to be blind from birth. This man is not blind from birth, but he's been an invalid for 38 years. So we don't know how old he is. I mean, was he 30 when he became an invalid? Then he's 68 years old. We just don't know. But we'll see later He's clearly not this way from birth. Not only does it not say it, but what else Jesus says. Now, when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" Now, do you notice, does anybody use the King James in here? Nobody? Wow. Okay. Well, if you had a King James, there's a verse that's taken out of all the modern translations, and that is, it says, the man was waiting for the moving of the water, for the angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred the water. Whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was healed of the disease he had. So those two verses are taken out of most modern translations because in the oldest manuscripts, which they didn't have when they translated the King James, this verse isn't in any of them. So there's a lot of evidence to suggest this had been added later on, but yet it does not mean that that's not something that was actually happening. But most of the textual evidence would say that wasn't in the earliest manuscripts. Honey?
The New American Standard has that.
Does it have it in there? Does it footnote it or not?
It has it in parentheses.
Okay,
In
yeah,
brackets.
brackets, right. So by putting it in brackets, they're saying this isn't part of the text. But they're trying to do that, whereas a lot of the versions like English Standard actually footnotes it and tells you that. Go ahead, Brian Jim.
I was just gonna say that's probably why most people don't use King James anymore, because there's a lot of stuff like that wasn't in the original.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a fault of the King James that they translated into English based on the Greek manuscripts that they have, but 100 years ago or so, we found a lot more Greek manuscripts, and so there's a lot more to go off of. With a lot of those, just as an aside, with a lot of those verses like that or pieces of verses, there's disagreement among the early manuscripts, but it's usually in both of them. But with this, it's I think almost completely, none of the early manuscripts have this in it. Now, they think that possibly they added this in those manuscripts, and maybe they had reason to do it. Maybe there were notes in some places of manuscripts, but they're trying to explain why it was this guy had been there, for 38 years and couldn't get down to the pool to get healed. So maybe they're trying to explain that and help us understand better what it is, because Jesus asked him in a minute. Yeah, verse 6. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he'd already been there a long time, we don't know if he'd been there all 38 years, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" So the idea would be that the reason that passage is in there is to help understand the explanation. In other words, do you not want to be healed? You just lay here all the time? You enjoy being a beggar, And so he says, "Do you want to be healed?" And the sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I'm going, another steps down before me." Again, Jesus doesn't make any argument with this in whether there really was miraculous healing powers or that was just a story that was going around. I don't know. They don't comment on it. We don't know any more than that. But the man thinks it happens. But he can't get down there because he can't walk. And so he says, "Yeah, I want to be healed, but I can't get down to the water." So what's he not looking for from Jesus? Healing. That's why the story is not why. That's part of the reason the story is so powerful. He's not looking for healing for Jesus. In fact, what would he like Jesus to do for him?
Put it in the water.
Yeah. Hey, if you just hang out here and the next time this happens, if you could just rush me down to the water, this would be great. Because he doesn't have a clue who Jesus is. Jesus is talking to him. And again, we'll see that's evidence later on. Jesus said to him, "Okay, get up, take up your bed and walk." We've read this so many times, it doesn't have an impact on us, but hey, do you want to be healed? Why? Do you want to be healed? Yeah, I want to be healed. I just can't get to the water. Okay, take up your bed and walk. Bam, he's healed. Now, this is real healing. He doesn't get up and take 2 steps and fall back down and say, "I'm healed." He gets up. In fact, what does he do? At once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. He didn't just walk, he carried his bed with him. Now, don't think of a, king-size water bed here. It's apparently a bed, a bed roll, like we would think of, sleeping bag, something like that. or maybe even a roll-up cot of some kind. But the power of Jesus to speak it into existence, a man that's been lame for 38 years. Now, what happens when you're lame for 38 years? Man, if any of you ever had surgery like that, it takes no time for your muscles to get just super weak. That's why they want to hurry and get you in rehab and work your muscles, because if you don't use them, they atrophy. And so you can imagine what this guy's legs look like. And if you've seen people that are paralyzed from the waist down, it doesn't take long to their upper body can be very strong. They can be active or whatever. You see these guys in like the wheelchair basketball Olympics or whatever. Man, these guys' upper body are just powerful. And then they got these little weeny legs, just shriveled up. And so Jesus, heals them, but brings his muscles back to the point where he can actually walk. He doesn't have to go to rehab for 6 months first. He can immediately walk, not with a cane, not with a walker, but immediately he's completely healed. And the impact of that should have been phenomenal, right? Go ahead, Brian, you had
Yeah, no, I just that is pretty amazing. Like it would have been physically visible, his legs just getting like normal size again.
Yeah.
Plumping up.
Yeah.
Plumping up, yeah. Aaron?
Do you think that there's a significance where Jesus picks the guy who's been there for 38 years?
Yeah.
I mean, because I think that the coming and going of people, they would have seen this guy there and they would have known who this guy is. And just like a regular neighbor, on the street, you see him over and over and over. And you see this guy at this pool, and he's been there for 38 years, so you don't miss him after the 100th time you've seen him. And so the fact that he's been there, he's known for being a cripple, and he's a well-known cripple, because he's been there so long, and Jesus probably picked him specifically because of that purpose. I think I'm maybe reading into that a little bit, but I think that it's a logical conclusion to say that, hey, Jesus picked out this guy who's been here for 38 years, that they make a big deal that he's been there a long time.
Yeah.
And that he can't heal himself, and then he's just, he's desperate.
Yeah, and I think we get to see the story of the blind man that we're going to see. It seems like Jesus picks the hardest cases every time. Where you are the run-of-the-mill faith healer, that ain't who you're picking. You're not, hey, you the guy hadn't walked in 38 years, come up on the stage. Have you ever seen him do that? No, never. Why? Because he can't do it. You talking about messing him up. You bring up a guy like that and you can't heal him, then your whole show is just died. And so Jesus, with no fear, and again, what else is he not doing that we would see if somebody today had this kind of power?
Calling attention to himself.
Yeah. Hey guys, y'all come up here. I'm about to heal this guy. Been how long you been lame, sir? 38 years? Yeah, 38 years. But none of that. He just walks and does it. Now, again, what we see with Jesus is the downplaying of the miracles. But who brings this? So in all these stories, though, who's the one that brings it out? It's not Jesus, is it? Who is it? The people who've been healed. Of course they're going to go tell everybody. Hey, it's just like you had cancer and they tried some new drug on you and it worked just like instantaneously. You'd be telling everybody you knew that had cancer, hey, look, man, you need to call this doctor. This works. It's the greatest cancer treatment ever. And that's the kind of idea with it. So he takes up his bed and walks. Now it's just a happy day. I mean, you just want to be excited and just really happy. And then if this was a movie presentation, you'd have some really dark music now playing in the background because it says, now that day was the Sabbath. Just ruined it all. Again, does Jesus not know it's the Sabbath? Yeah, so clearly Jesus does this healing purposely on the Sabbath. What does that show? What does that show now as Jesus' ministry is progressing? What's it show?
It's not work for him.
Huh?
It's not work for him to heal someone.
Okay.
Because otherwise, you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath.
Right, but I'm saying from Jesus' perspective, what does this show? Mike?
Lord of the Sabbath.
Well, that's true too. Yeah. But what's changed? Does he not know there's going to be a controversy over this? No, he knows, right? So what's changed?
He's inviting controversy.
Yes. He's inviting controversy. He's saying, we're ready to start.
It is my time.
It's my time. We're going to start here, and it's going to go now. And we're not looking back from this point on, because this is the pivotal moment in his ministry, as you read John's account, that changes his relationship with the Jews. This is the reason they're going to want to kill him, right here. And he does it deliberately. He is in control. I think that's the thing. He's in control. And so Jesus proves his power, even though he knows it's going to invoke trouble. Now, he hasn't done this, though, up until this time. And so there was a time when he didn't want to get into something controversial. I was talking to somebody about this the other day, about knowing when and when not to bring something to this level. Takes a lot of wisdom, doesn't it? Now think about it, because we were talking about, okay, they're doing a Bible study now at the gym once a month that I've been going to, and I'm just trying to be quiet, just listen and kind of let things play out. And y'all are shocked at this, but that's hard for me to do, to be quiet. But the idea of I don't, in my mind, in my wisdom, and as I think about this and try to do what's going to bring the best glory to God, it's not the time to jump in and say, all y'all believe wrong about this. And then I got to thinking, I was talking to somebody about this at Marion the other day. Then I got to thinking about Jesus doesn't start his ministry till he's how old? 30, right? So was he still going into the synagogues and going to the temple every year? Was he sitting at the feet? We know at 12 he was. So I don't think that stopped. But from 12 till he's 30, he sits and listens, and he doesn't do what? Doesn't stand up and say, y'all are wrong. How many times do you think he sat in the synagogue and heard them talk about a passage that was about him, and they got it all wrong, and he didn't say anything? You think that was hard for him? To me, that would have been part of the hardest part of his ministry. I got to thinking about that. Knowing the truth. No, he is the truth. He is the word. And sitting there and listening to these men every week or every festival talk about things and get it all wrong. And yet he didn't say anything. Why not?
Part of the plan.
It wasn't the right time. And what's changed now in John 5? It's the right time. Now again, Jesus got that perfect, didn't he? His Father got that perfect. We don't always get it perfect, but I think there's a lot to learn. There are times when we have to listen to people say things about the Bible or about God that just aren't right, but it's not the right time for us to stand up and just say, you're wrong. But then there are other times when it's time to get up and heal on the Sabbath. Do something, say something that you know is going to be controversial, that you know is going to be disdained by most of the people that hear it. Boy, it takes a lot of wisdom to know that. And we're not always going to get it right. But some of the hardest things we might do is not say something, not because we don't have the courage to speak. That could be a problem too if we're just cowards. But it's not that we don't have the courage to speak, but that we say it's not the best thing to do right now. I just meet somebody and we start having a conversation about God. It's not the right time yet to convict them of their sin. Instead, I need to be quiet and I need to get to know them better. I need to look for an opportunity. Then there are going to be other times when it is the right time and I need to speak the first time. And man, I've gotten that wrong so many times in my life, it ain't funny. But there is wisdom in knowing that one approach is not always the best approach. It was the best approach to say nothing until he was 30 years old. And then he goes and starts his ministry and he's for a year or so. It was not the best approach to heal on the Sabbath day. He could have done it any time. But now is the time. And so now he's going to do it. And it's going to start a series of events that are going to lead him to his death. But it's the right time. So part of our prayer, I think, as we deal with people out in the world and trying to work with people with Christ is, God, help me to have the wisdom to know when it's the right time to be quiet and when it's the right time to speak up. And when I do speak up, the right thing to say. Because you can know all the passages about how to teach somebody on whatever it is, but to have the wisdom and to understand that it is not always the will of God to stand up and heal on the Sabbath, but sometimes it is the will of God to stand up and heal on the Sabbath. So we don't have that kind of power. We have the power to speak the truth of God, and sometimes not saying something is the best course. And we just have to, again, rely on our wisdom to do that. So it's the Sabbath day. Now, verse 10, so the Jews said to the man who had been healed, it is the Sabbath and it's not lawful for you to take up your bed. What do you think about that? Kelly, you're smiling. What do you think about that?
It's just so absurd. That's what they would focus on, because obviously they saw too that this guy has been there, and that's what they're going to focus on. Like that says so much about their heart.
Yeah, it's like Aaron said, they knew this guy. Well, he'd been there all 38 years. They certainly knew about him. And so they quickly recognize him that's doing this. And they say to him, hey, why don't you know it's the Sabbath and it's not lawful for you to take up your bed? Just what's that say? It says about their heart, doesn't it? They have no compassion, no appreciation. How did they think this guy just suddenly got his bed taken up? They didn't ask him. At first, they don't. Well, aren't you the lame guy? Aren't you the guy that hadn't been on a walk for 38 years? Man, congratulations. What a blessing that you can walk now. There's none of that because they're hyper-focused on what? The Sabbath day, the law. Yeah. Aaron and then Justin.
So there may be a chance that they didn't recognize him
Could be.
at that point because, the Pharisees have a tendency to be narcissistic, self-focused kind of people. And they're like, what are you doing? Nobody's supposed to be working right now. And they're not even focused on the people around them. They're just focused on calling people out around them that say, hey, you're not supposed to be doing this.
And they were above the poor in a lot of ways, right?
So
Yeah, that could be for sure.
That could be a problem that's causing this.
Right. Aaron, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, we can maybe give them the benefit of the doubt for a whole verse here. Instantly, they certainly wouldn't have expected this guy to be walking around. And if people are sinning, is there not some obligation to be like, hey, you're not supposed to be doing this? Don't you know? Everybody's here for the festival. Like, you should know you shouldn't be doing this. So maybe benefit of the doubt, but I mean, only for another verse.
Yeah, because he does say, and then we'll quit. He says, but he answered them, the man who healed me, that man said to me, take up your bed and walk. And they asked him, who is the man who said to you, take up your bed and walk? Now, so they didn't say, what do you mean he healed you? That's what gives me the idea that they know who he is, right? So, all right, we'll pick up there next time. Thank you.